So today we're going to go over making your syllabus for your class. I'm going to go over the very bare minimum requirements for the syllabus, and then in class we can talk about more specifics. So where I'm at here is the CTE, Center for Teaching Excellence website from USC. And this is your best friend. And if you are at another institution, you'll very likely have something that is very similar to a Center for Teaching Excellence, if not a CTE. Most institutions have this or something very similar that gives you resources. So, teaching for USC, you can actually find templates here on the Syllabus Templates page. There's several pages throughout this, and we'll sort of cover the different resource locations. But what we have here, for example, is these templates for face-to-face courses, and we have templates for distributed learning, online learning, blended courses, depending on what modality you're planning on teaching. And here, full schedules so that you don't have to, have a calendar up and look at exactly which classes are what. It has drop add dates. It has, if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, for example, it will, if you're teaching in the spring, it'll have a full template for every meeting date. And then, like, for example, spring break, it'll have that marked out. Just make sure that you're kind of paying attention to the course date, because if it, for example, if a drop add date is on a Tuesday and it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, you might mistakenly think, oh, because it's in the table, let me, do class that day. So just kind of being careful about paying attention to the dates. But these are really, really wonderful resources, and they do it all for you so that you don't have to go in and figure out all of your meeting dates. So looking back kind of at this site, I'm going to go here to this Syllabus Best Practices PDF, and then I'm going to show you guys, after we do that, the required verbiage that you need in your syllabi. Here is required and recommended, which is really nice if you want to include other things in your syllabus, but the recommendations are kind of, you don't have to have that in there if it particularly applies to your class or something that's important to you. But the required verbiage are things like Title IX and student disability services, things like that. So let's take a look at this syllabus best practices. Thinking about how you are creating your syllabus, I want to kind of mention there are three major parts to the syllabus. You're going to see this best practices broken down into more than three parts. But generally speaking, you have a course overview and description, which has all the information about the course, all the information about instructor, all the information and contact information for TAs, things like that. You're going to have a policies and procedures section, and then finally a course outline and schedule. So let's take a look, and I've got it up in a tab here. This is the best practices. So like I said, it's broken down into many more categories, but this is much more specific in terms of what you are expecting to include. So everything that's marked with an asterisk is required. And you'll note that this is sort of a general syllabus best practices, so it includes the best practices for both a face-to-face class and a distributed learning or online class. So there are some things that are required for online classes that aren't required for face-to-face because special technology may be needed for the online classes. So, and those are kind of marked out in terms of what's required for each one. So, very basic course information. What course is it? When is it being offered? When is it meeting? What is your name as the instructor? What do you prefer being called is really great to add in there, because then students know how to address you. You'll need to provide some kind of information on how to contact you. And it's really good to put your location in terms of your office so that students know, I can go to the syllabus and figure all this out and I don't have to go anywhere else. And then as you put this on your learning management system like Blackboard, you can also include, there's usually a section where you can put course information. It doesn't necessarily have to just be a file where the syllabus is, but it can also be contact information that they can get outside of the syllabus. But you really want everything self-contained in the syllabus, so it's a one-stop shop. And that's the one place that people go to. If you have a TA, it's really great to put their information in here, and also on the, in this case, Blackboard page as well. So here you can see the things that are absolutely required. You have to have your name, you have to have contact information, but specifically what you put in terms of, I prefer you to email me over call me. That's something that, is really good to include so that students know the best way to reach you and the fastest way they can get a hold of you, instead of them sort of playing a guessing game. When it comes to course description, you must put the description that is listed in the bulletin. And so the easiest way to find that information is to, and I'll give you the websites, but if you're ever kind of lost, is to do basically U of SC Psychology Bulletin, and that will bring up the bulletin. But you can go to, and there's different websites. Let me see if I can get it here. There's different websites where you can get to the main bulletin. So here you can actually, this is every description that's on the bulletin basically would be in a course catalog if we were to print a course catalog for every single course that we offer. And so you can then type in and find your course and see, what does the bulletin say the description of this course is. I'm going to use an example of social psychology throughout this course. I feel like it's a decent example. It's a pretty, in terms of, if we think of like survey of social psychology, it's a basic course. Let's say you're teaching social psychology, you would type that in and find that description for that course. In the case of the bulletin description, it's usually rather vague. You may want to go more specific and have something that is in this section. Maybe you list the bulletin and description, and then you have on there a much more specific description that goes into more detail. So having something that's a little bit more personable, having something that provides like a real world situation that's related to the major topic, and then aligning it with your course objectives, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So having the sort of standard course description, and then maybe under that, say something like, the main objective of this course is for social psychology, explore human behavior in a social context. We often wonder why people act certain ways in certain situations, why good people do bad things. We're going to answer questions about social stereotyping and prejudice. We're going to discuss why people perform better in certain situations. Understanding how the mind and environment interact can help us understand our behavior and the behaviors of others. And then you can go into the course objectives. So you can say, after completing this course, students should be able to, and then you list out those course learning outcomes or objectives. And you can do that. So here you can see for distributed learning or an online course, you have different information. You want to include the course description, but for a face-to-face or any modality, you should have these learning outcomes listed out. And these learning outcomes should kind of follow this subject, verb, object, SVO type format. So, the subject, obviously the student is going to, and a verb like remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. These are things that we've talked about in designing course, so this should be familiar to you. And then the object, is it conceptual, procedural, metacognitive? Think about the kind of Bloom's taxonomy and how we were talking about how kind of high up the pyramid we want to go. And so these are things that you're going to include. You can also remember, we've talked about SMART, specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, time framed. These are great guidelines for developing these learning outcomes. And really thinking about 4 to 5 goals. Try not to, overdo it. You don't want to overwhelm students, but 4 to 5 goals is really sufficient, and it's in line with the APA standards. So these are really great, some great sort of ideas to think about is identify major theories, understand how research methods contribute to the study of human behavior, explore boundaries of free will in social situations, apply social psychology to your life to better understand how you behave in social situations. I really think that being able to take something and then apply it personally in a person's life, in a student's life, really helps them understand what are the things they are going to be able to apply to themselves and take away from that course. So, having really good learning objectives, making sure you're including all the information about the course, any prerequisites they may need, and you can get that from the bulletin as well. For a distributed learning class, you're going to need to tell them how you are going to give them information. How are you going to communicate with them, especially if it's an asynchronous class? How often are you available, for example, for online office hours? That might be separate for people who need extra help. How are you going to communicate feedback? Is it going to be they turn in an assignment through, let's say, Blackboard, and then you provide them feedback on Blackboard? Are you going to email them separately that feedback? These are all things that you do want to think about for an online course. And of course, we can talk about this in class. That's a little bit separate. Because most students don't teach an online course for their first course, but you do need to make sure that you explain your commitment and the commitment that the students make in terms of hours. It's hard sometimes for students to conceptualize how much an online class does actually take up in relation to, because they're not, going to lecture if it's an asynchronous class. When you are sort of describing any sort of technology and needs for the class, you need to tell students, is there a recommended set of text or materials? If there's recommended versus required, you need to include all the information that the student can go and then purchase that or rent it. So ISBN. In addition, if you have a policy where you accept earlier editions, or that you adopted a textbook and it has, maybe you're on the 7th edition, but that the 6th edition is comparable and fine for them to use, let them know that. You can say in the syllabus earlier editions are acceptable, or maybe you say specifically the one earlier edition is acceptable, or edition 6 or 7 is acceptable, because students will ask you that. You want to kind of think about what are they going to preemptively, what kinds of questions are they going to have. They typically ask, can they pick older books, and do I need this book? Do I need this book to make an A and succeed in this course? And if you are adopting any kind of like Launchpad or any kind of secondary supplementary stuff that they need to pay for, you should specify that as well. Any kind of readings, materials, APA does require you, and this says distributed learning, but if you do have readings and materials, you do want to make sure that you include APA citations so that students know exactly what the material, even if you provide those papers to them, you still want to make sure you have that in there. If it's an online course, you're going to need to tell them exactly what software, technology, anything that they're going to need. I always like to include technical support so that if students know I'm having a problem with Blackboard, having a problem with whatever software, to include that technical sort of piece in there. Students really seem to appreciate that because they don't have to go look for it. Now, the part where you talk about sort of the course outline, or actually before you get to the outline, really your policies and procedures and grading, you really need to lay out how they're going to be assessed. Are you going to provide rubrics? How this assignment should be formatted? What's the expectation? You can give sort of general descriptions of the assignment so they know and can have an idea. Okay, I'm looking at a 10-page APA paper. I'm looking at activities that are going to be low stakes, or I'm looking at a really big project that I'm gonna have to work on throughout the class. So giving them that information, how you're grading them, what each thing is worth in terms of points, and maybe you do everything out of 100 points, or maybe you do percentages. However you do it, it really needs to make sense for the course, and it needs to be laid out. The more information that you can give them up front, the more the students appreciate it and the less questions they have from day one. So they really do appreciate kind of laying it all out and seeing exactly what the expectation is. If you are teaching a course that is a 500 or 600 level at USC, this is also a course that a graduate student can take. So you must contain in your syllabus an explanation of the differences and requirements for graduate and undergraduate credit. And graduate students should be required to complete not only the undergraduate work, but also additional graduate level work. So that might mean, on top of everything that's required in the course, a research paper or substantial additional reading, and they need to be evaluated on a more rigorous basis than undergraduate students. And that is something that the College of Arts and Sciences has been very, very, very serious about. They need to see that if you are teaching a 500 or 600 level course, even if you don't have any graduate students enroll in the class, you need to have very specific information about it. If you were to have a graduate student, what they need to do that's different. So, making sure that is clearly differentiated. Now, in your policies and procedures part, it's really good to include very specific information about, are you taking attendance? What happens? How many can they miss? What happens if they're tardy? What is tardy? Is that 10 minutes late, 5 minutes late? What is that? You also do need to include an academic integrity statement because, you want students to know that cheating and plagiarism is not acceptable. I'm going to show you an example of a verbiage that you can use, but anytime you can get really specific or give examples, that's really great because you want students to know exactly what you mean by plagiarism. One thing that students tend to not understand is self-plagiarism, and so they don't realize that using assignments from other classes is considered self-plagiarism, and they should be doing unique assignments. Expectations for classroom behavior is really good. A lot of people don't realize that, especially in a course like social psychology, we are going to be having really tough discussions about stuff that you don't talk about around the dinner table. Reminding students to, be kind to each other, that these are not anonymous forums, things like that is really helpful. Same thing with like etiquette, in this case, netiquette. So, when you're doing online forums, saying things like use emojis and emoticons to demonstrate that to demonstrate tone, because that's really difficult to sort of convey. Any kind of late work that you have, any kind of, information that you want to get about, for example, diversity and inclusion. So DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially if you're really interested in decolonizing your syllabus, is a really great place to add a statement about your stance on this, as well as how that's important to you for treating your students in an equitable manner, but also looking at your syllabus and your topic. So this is a really great way to fit that in. Another really important thing for some people is, what is your electronics policy? Do you allow for people to use their phones in class? I have a very specific policy, for example. I don't care what electronics you use as long as they're not disruptive, but on test day, everything goes. So no phone, no laptop, no notes, nothing. You have to put them up. So anything that you think might be a problem, you need to specify in your syllabus. Another thing that I like to put with the attendance policy, for example, in my classes, I don't take attendance, but if you are going to be out for whatever reason, right? So let's say you're ill, you're sick, you have a death in the family, whatever it might be. I actually have a statement in my syllabus that says that students have to go through the student ombudsman or ombudsperson to get a quote unquote university approved excuse. And so this is a great way to avoid any kind of personal information, HIPAA information, health information that you do not want students emailing you, a doctor's note saying that they had this, and an explanation of what they might have. Basically the ombuds person will email you and all the other faculty professors that the student has and say, this student is excused from this date to this date due to, and they might say illness or, an excused reason. They don't go into detail because you don't need to know that information. So if the person needs extensions, for example, they have an university approved excuse. And I used to really flip-flop about this in terms of like requiring students to have documentation of illness. And I realized that it wasn't equitable because some students didn't have health insurance. But the difference between USC and other institutions is that we do have a clinic on campus, and students can go to that clinic and they don't need to have insurance. They can go and use those services. So I have tightened up a little bit more on that because of that. But at my previous institution, for a while, we actually did not have a clinic on campus, and I did not feel that was equitable. So if you're in a small liberal arts school or you're in a small rural area, that's something that you really need to think about. Do you want to be equitable? Do you want to require students to have that kind of documentation if they do not have the means to see a healthcare provider? So things to think about. I like to also always include student support services. I know this isn't a requirement, except disability services statement is. I like to give students as many resources as possible, even if you think that they should know it, they might not. And so sort of letting them know that there are resources that they can go and get information from, because they might not realize, oh, we have a tutoring center. Oh, we have, a place where I can go and get study tips, things like that. And so any other policy that you think might be important. So for example, if you don't take late work, or if you say a good policy on late work is if you turn it in every day it's late, you get like 1 point taken off. And at a certain point, it's worth no points for them to turn it in. This sort of is a good place for it saves you trouble at the very end of the semester if somebody's like, well, I want to turn all of my work in at the end. If you have everybody turning late work in the end of the semester, then you will really be overburdened with grading. So I tend to like to have a late policy. Either I don't accept late work unless it's a extenuating circumstance, or I don't accept late work past a certain time, past the due date. And again, that's kind of up to you. And so the topic, the outline, this is something that you will have to think about in terms of schedule. And we went to this when we went to this site here, this is where you would get the schedule sort of template. Thinking about when you want to do the topics, at what point do you want to do the topics, what do you want to cover, all of your exam dates, test dates. These are things that you want to provide students so that they have an idea of when things are due. I try not to mess with test dates because students do lock those in and they might plan travel around them. If they're an athlete, they may have certain dates that they have to kind of work in terms of if they're going to be in town. And then students who are taking their test at disability services, they need to lock those dates in as well. So these are something that you try not to mess up too much. I like to call the schedule tentative just in case we spend more or less time on a particular topic. And I just want to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. The final exam date, if you're going to do a final exam, of course, there's a final exam schedule online, and you can find that on the USC website. One kind of key piece of information is that you are not allowed to actually do any kind of exams. There's like a date for this, but basically the last week of class. You're really not supposed to do any kind of exams during that time. You're not supposed to have your final exam during the last week of class, for example. And how you decide to go over this syllabus is completely up to you. If you want to spend the first day going over the major key points, what you want students to know, giving them the drop add date and saying, hey, this is the chance, this is the time where you have to make a decision if you think this is overwhelming and you don't want to take this class. I have actually given quizzes on the syllabus in other classes, especially if it's an online class, because I want students to demonstrate that they understand, for example, what I mean by plagiarism and cheating. And also if you do have a student that plagiarizes or cheats, and then you have a syllabus quiz that they have to get right. So you tell them they can take it as many times, you have to make 100 on it, and they answer the question correctly, then you demonstrate that they do understand what cheating is. And that can be helpful if you have a cheating case. But really this should be something that they can go back to and always double check. Hey, this is, these are the policies. This is what I need to know. This is also a really good site. It's basically an overview of everything that we went over. It's sort of like, how do you get started? What do you need to include? It also has the site for the bulletin, which that's where you see course descriptions. You can get the bulletin description. And this learning outcomes link is all the information that we talked about, the SMART learning objectives. So these are all really helpful sites for you to go through. The last thing I want to cover when it comes to this is, so this is an example syllabus where they also give you all of the required pieces. So here, this is just a nice template, and it's basically every category that tells you, okay, you need to add this information in. These are the kinds of things, and some tips about, for example, the learning outcomes, what required text, and then this is the format that's expected to give to students so they know exactly what addition in text you want them to get, including the ISBN number. All of the things, all of these are sort of, in some cases it tells you, okay, you should include this, like what is your, what applies to your class. But in other cases, they actually gives you example ways to present information. So here, this would be like breaking it down this way. If you have a point system, what's your grading scale? And you can actually copy and paste that. When it comes to the policy and procedures, again, example verbiage that you can use, and you can take whatever you want of this, okay? Whatever you feel like you want to take, you can just copy and paste it into your syllabus. And then in this case, for disability services, you want to take this exact statement, copy it and paste it in your syllabus. These are things that you will want to include. Like in this example here, this is a breakdown of the class dates, and you can say assignments are due. Maybe you have readings instead of assignment, you have readings. Now, when you look at, for example, the other templates, and you want to see what would be some other kind of things that you can include and what kind of verbiage that you want to include, here again is other examples of, ways to say things. And here's the technical, I love this technical support statement. I copy and paste this right into my syllabus. There's other examples of how you can break down assignments, and it tells you how sort of specific you need to get. And again, just really great ways for you to take this information and place it into your syllabus. And it gives you those categories so you're not forgetting anything. Here's a really nice write-up of, so in this case, looking at, laptops and smartphones only, are allowed when it's required for course assignments. And it's specific about, okay, in this case, this person, may or may not want them to use their laptops, but in this case, cell phones should be silent if you need to leave for emergencies. It's just a nice way to kind of frame it. If you say, hey, I don't care about cell phones and laptops, then you would, word this how it makes the most sense for you. So just going through diversity, I really like including, like I said, a diversity and inclusion statement. And these are things that you can use in terms of sample language. If you think that you're going to be teaching a course that's going to have triggers for people, this is a nice statement because it tells the student, hey, if you have an issue or you're worried or concerned about something, let me know. This is a really great statement here. If you're aware of any cognitive or emotional triggers, let me know so that I'm going to avoid this topic, or maybe you're going to warn the student ahead of time, hey, we're going to cover this thing. And again, being able to take this information, you can take it word for word. If you have a particular policy about, let me know what your pronouns are. Again, respecting the students and what they, prefer to, for you to address them as. Again, really great information about values and then expectations, copyright. Like I said, the Disability Services Center statement, you do have to include in there information. I like to include this. Again, all this is great information for students to understand what their resources are. You might end up having a syllabus that is like 7 or 8 pages long, but as long as you include all the information in there, these are all really great statements to include to allow students to get that information from one place. So we're going to go over some more stuff in class, but I just want to give you guys sort of a rundown of the sort of bare minimum that you should be including in your syllabi.